name is Nicolle. I'm a career coach here at the Amica Center. So if you have any questions about career education or development, we are here to help you. And then, David, I'll allow you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, no, hi, everyone. David Giardino. I graduated Bryant 2009, which is increasingly further away every time I mention it. I had previously been with Disney for about 10 or 12 years, and most recently now joined the NBC Sports team. I've been on the marketing team at NBC Sports for the past 6 months or so.
Yeah, which is amazing. I know that we have a lot of marketing majors here, or even people who are, in a multitude of different majors, but are really interested in going into the sports realm, whether that be sports media and entertainment, or whether that be, just working for, within an athletic organization.
Mm-hmm.
So I think hearing from you will be really beneficial in so many different ways. But so the first question I'm going to ask is, what was your major at Bryant and what internships did you engage in?
So my major was marketing. I was a minor in psychology because I was always interested in human behavior. And I guess I thought at one point maybe I would pursue like a clinical psych realm, but that was, I was not smart enough, or did I have enough energy to complete anything like that? So I didn't do that. But I always kind of knew that was why I wanted marketing. I was always interested in consumer behavior. And so actually one of the internships I did when I was at Bryant was the Disney College program, which is like kind of a hands-on internship that puts you like in the parks doing like an entry-level kind of full-time role in the parks, but also gives you the opportunity to take some courses, to network with some folks on the Disney side, especially depending on the discipline that you wanted to kind of emphasize. You could chat and network with folks in that discipline. And so that was actually probably the bigger internship I did while I was at Bryant. And then I came back and I did the campus rep program, which Disney doesn't offer anymore. But it was effectively a way to try to communicate that program on your campus. So those were the two kind of big Disney related internships I did while I was at Bryant.
Awesome. Cool. And so obviously the internships were helpful because I know that I think then started your career with Disney right after that.
Yes, I did. I mean, I got lucky. I mean, that's what I always like to tell people too. Like, this is not a situation where like, oh, you do these 3 or 4 things and then you end up in this place. Like, you can do everything right and you can still end up not exactly where you want. For me, I was fortunate that at the time that I was graduating Bryant, I was looking for marketing internships at Disney, and I applied to a bunch of them, and none of them called me back, but public relations did, which I was an editor of the school paper at Bryant at the time. I was a sports editor. So I guess I kind of finagled that into some semblance of PR experience, and was fortunate to get an internship with the Disney PR team out of school that ultimately turned into a full-time role on that team. And for me, like, PR was not what I always wanted to do, but I'm super fortunate that I was able to get that role out of school because I think it taught me a lot. And there's a lot of things I think in that field from a communication standpoint that did completely translate to what I would do eventually in marketing as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so what other things did you do while you were a student at Bryant? So obviously sports editor for the paper was probably one of them, but were there any other things that you did while you were in those college years that really helped you to then take with you into your career post Bryant?
Yeah, the Archway sports editor gig was a big one because it helped my writing skills. It helped me kind of understand the athletic department at the school, which helped me in a sports specific field. And even though I didn't ever really want a career in like sports journalism, I think it was helpful. And I always tell people, like, even if you're not exactly where you want to be in a certain field or discipline, sometimes getting near it can help because you can just understand the inner workings of it. And so that was super helpful. The other thing I always mention too, and this isn't necessarily an extracurricular activity, but I made it a point to chat up with a lot of the professors at Bryant that I felt like could give me career development advice. Because what you kind of learn in the classroom, right? It's like it's the start. It's like a foundation, I suppose, for how you're expected to act or perform in like, a real world environment. But it's all the other stuff, all the other guidance you can get from professors in your universities that can help you along the way. Hey, do you know anyone in this field? Can I talk to anybody in this field? Like, have you done any consulting in this field? And could you give me advice on what to look for, what to say, what not to say? And so for me, I'm forever grateful for Lori Coakley and Michael Roberto, because they were just two of many that helped me think about like, okay, you want to get to Disney, great. Like, how do you translate that into something that we could actually help you get out of school?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that, talking to people who are, in the field or experts in the field is so helpful as well. And we can definitely, get into the importance of networking and,
Mm-hmm.
Cultivating relationships. But the next question I want to ask, kind of getting more into your career, is how has your career progressed over time?
Yeah, no, great question. Not like linearly, like not like always this is exactly what it is.
It doesn't often, so
it does not
for
often.
anybody.
I think my 5-year plan has changed 25 different times.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'll say that I started in PR, like I'd mentioned, but I always knew that I wanted to get into marketing. That was always kind of where my passions lied. And so about a couple years into the time that I was on the Disney PR team, I started to try to network with some folks in the marketing organization. Like I'd started to work with them on some projects just as a stakeholder in PR, but I was trying to kind of say, hey, like I think I could get, or add value from a marketing standpoint. So, I started to play that game of like just meeting people, talking to people, trying to explain to them what I wanted to do someday and where I wanted to go. And I always remember that one of the funny things was I was actually talking to someone who would become my future boss in sports marketing and marketing for ESPN Wireless Sports Complex. But she was on a completely different team at the time. And I was asking her questions about that team. I was like, I'd love to know more about this team. And she was saying, actually, I'm literally just about to move over to the sports group. There's nothing open for you right now, but like, let's stay connected. And like 8 or 9 months later, an opportunity presented itself that I applied for. And that was kind of how I moved on to the sports marketing team at Disney in Orlando for ESPN Wireless Sports. And I had some other peripheral responsibilities, but that was like the bulk of it. And then from there, I started to work more with partners at ESPN, which for those that don't know, Disney owns ESPN. And so the relationship there is that, the complex in Orlando is both a live event like facility, but also does some broadcast and programming efforts related to ESPN in Bristol. So I started to talk to partners at ESPN more, and that ended up creating like plans on how to integrate them and how to grow their brand in Orlando. And that turned into moving over to the business development team. I'd started to talk to folks on the business development team, a director on the business development team, tried to put my work in front of them. And they were like, hey, this is great. There's an opportunity on this team for you to do more of that. And that's what translated to jumping to that team. And then, from there, the NBC Sports thing was honestly a mix of a few different things. We were looking to get up north. We were looking at what we could potentially do traveling back up closer to family. I'm from Rhode Island, which is, obviously why I attended Bryant. And, was looking to try to get not all the way to New York, but like somewhere in Connecticut, maybe, where there was an opportunity to sit on a marketing group. And NBC Sports one was a perfect opportunity that I was able to find. And so it was a long way to answer your question. The short way to answer your question was a lot of trial and error and a lot of talking to people and a lot of closed doors and open doors, and it ended up working out eventually. But, it's a different story. You could sit down with 10 other people and they could tell you 10 different versions of that story and how they might have navigated 4 different jobs in 10 years.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that, and this is something that even when I'm talking to some of our faculty and staff, or I'm talking to other alumni, across the board, everyone says that networking and building relationships with people, staying connected with people, helping others out, and then having that help be returned to you is hands down one of the most effective ways to advance yourself and your career. And it sounds like you would absolutely agree with that and saying, the relationships and networking and building those connections is so important and integral in, developing professionally.
Yeah, 100%. I always try to tell people that, and again, it's not always achievable, but if you are meeting the interviewer for the first time in the interview, then you're already behind, because there is a very good chance that people that know that person, whether working internally with them or being referred externally, they've already had a chance to talk to them. They've already had a chance to kind of cultivate, like, this is what I want. This is my work. And so you're at this disadvantage. Not to say you can't get the job, but that's why I always tell people, like, the worst time to set up a meet and greet with someone is when there's a job out there. Like, talk to people at all points for all reasons, as long as you are making connections. And like, you'll know within minutes of talking to someone whether they are really there to help you or whether they were kind of, strong-armed by someone. Hey, you should talk to this person. And then, fine. They don't all have to be great home runs, but it's more just meet people, talk to people, share your passions or your interests, because something could come up eventually, and just staying connected to people, honestly, is like more than half the battle.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a huge thing, I think, for students to take away, is even if, you are meeting someone or there's some type of a networking event, just go for it and put yourself out there, because you really never know. Like, just in the same way you expect yourself to grow, all the people that you meet and connect with are also going to grow in their careers, and they might, eventually move on to something really great. And then you might be one of the first people they think of when an opportunity comes up and you want to join them in their next great thing as well. So I think that that's really, really important. And I know that we've got, quite a few marketing students who may be watching this now. So I do want to talk, about the marketing industry. And I first want to ask, we'll start with the obstacles and the challenges or difficulties of working in marketing from an insider.
Yeah, a lot. In that, like, no matter what the industry is, I think this is probably true. But this is, I think, particularly true for anybody in a content marketing related job. People's attention it's fragmented more than it ever was, right? So like, take NBC as the example. 30, 40 years ago, there were literally like 3 channels, right? Or maybe when basic cable started, there was a handful of channels competing for consumers' attention. And like now, I mean, this is an example, right? I mean, one of the things I always try to tell people now is, like, when you're thinking about a marketing plan for programming, like, don't just say what's Netflix doing, or don't just say what CBS or Fox are doing. Like, who's on Instagram Live, right? Who's playing Xbox, who's on YouTube? Because there's so many things that are competing for consumers' attention, that marketing, in that mix, it's really challenging. It's really challenging to break through. So I think that's the first thing I always say. The field of marketing, I think it affords some pros and cons, right? Because on the one hand, as far as creative fields goes, if you have, an interest in kind of data and analytics, like, you can kind of bring both in, right? So you can find roles in marketing that are both creative, or even solely creative, or solely analytical, or in my case, it's a little bit of both. But the drawbacks are, you can have what you think to be the smartest, greatest marketing plan ever. And if the product that you're promoting is just not great, or if it's just too cluttered, there's too many other things competing for consumers' attention, like, you can still fail. And it's not necessarily, a consequence of your plan. It's what happens. And so I think to be in marketing right now is to understand that, and to have a thick skin, and to realize, like, we're gonna have to try a million different things, and maybe one thing breaks through.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we've spoken before, and that I came from the, mental health psychology background. And in this role, I've had to dabble into social media, as we can see here, and learning how to market our services. And I have to say, marketing is, you do have to grow that thick skin, because there's some things that you put out there and you think it's just such a great idea, and then it just has zero success. You're like, oh, okay. So I definitely think our students, recognizing and hearing that there will be some of those flops in their career, and that's okay, and it's all part of it. And even the experts in the field go through those periods of time. So I think that's important for them to know. And then, what are some of your favorite parts about being in marketing?
So I've been, like, super lucky, super fortunate that I've always been able to market with brands that I believe in, that are, well known. Have you placed me in, like, mom and pop's cookie shop? Like, I don't know how good I'd be at it, right? Like, it's a different experience to be at Disney or to be at NBC, because you have resources available to you. And so, at least marketing for a big company, one of the things I do love is oftentimes you can go get the question that you're seeking. You can go get the answer to it, right? You can go say, hey, we need to do some research on this. We need to commission a study on this. The other part about that is you're working with super talented people, right? So there are times where I'll put strategies out on how I think we should be communicating to a certain segment about a certain product or program. And then the creative team will come back with something that was like 10 times better than I could even think of. Like maybe I had the kernel of the idea, but they were the ones that blew it out and made it incredible. And so I think that's the other part of marketing that's awesome, is that you have to be collaborative to succeed.
Right.
But you will tend to work with a lot of really smart people in all these other little disciplines that you don't necessarily think of day to day. That when you like bring it all together, like I always say, I end up learning more. Sometimes after I'm presenting a strategy, I end up learning more from the people in the room giving me the feedback from it, because there's so many different things that other people are experts in that you don't even think of when you're working on like a marketing strategy team.
Gotcha. Awesome. Yeah, I think there's definitely an advantage, as you said, to, working for, bigger companies. For some of for some of our students, working for a company like NBC is a dream. Like that's a dream job because it is so well known. I mean, you just think about, especially right now, I think about, Sunday football, and I'm just like, I think ESPN, I think NBC Sports. And so to, be at such a well-recognized company really is incredible. So how can our students, like, obviously it might not be where they start, NBC wasn't, you also started with Disney too, which is also a well-known company. But for our students who may be starting at some smaller marketing agencies or companies, how can they, be competitive when going for their dream jobs at some of these amazing, well-known companies? How can
so it's a really good question. And, there's like two schools of thought to this, and I will give you my perspective, which I don't say that is the right one. I think it's just, there's two opinions. Because I used to have this conversation a lot with people at Disney that were like, well, how do I break in? Should I take a job that's completely unrelated to my discipline just because I want to work for this company and then find my way into marketing, to whatever it is that I'm looking to do? Or should I go get really good at marketing somewhere at some other company that maybe isn't well known, and then try to apply that to a big company eventually? I actually, you might be surprised that I say this because I've only ever worked at those two companies. I actually think that the latter makes more sense. I think it is more valuable to go get experience in the discipline that you want to be in, with some caveats. I mean, if it's like for me, like PR, I thought was close enough to marketing that I thought it would be helpful. We'd be all in the same meetings, right? Yeah. So I felt like there was an opportunity at Disney. But by and large, if you're going to be like 3 stratospheres away from where you eventually want to be discipline-wise, I don't know, in big companies particularly, if that's beneficial. I would argue it'd be better to go and get some experience at a smaller company, all the while trying to grow your network, right? I mentioned it at the top, but like talk to professors, like while you're in school. You would be shocked at some of the clients that they've consulted with. It's incredible. And they're willing to connect you. They're willing to talk to you about their experiences. They might be willing to stage meetings with you with some of the folks that they know. So like always think about that. Think about ways to expand your network through like even like LinkedIn. I have students that hit me up on LinkedIn all the time. I try to respond to as many as I can, that say, hey, like I went to Bryant too, or like I did my grad at USC. Like, hey, I went to USC. Like, how do I, get to wherever? And I'll give them whatever advice I can. So like, I think that helps. Not everybody will respond, but like try to connect with people. I think that's helpful too. I think it's a matter of just growing your network, but trying to get really good in the meantime in the discipline you want to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That is great advice. Yeah. And I think I preach it almost every single day that I'm in the office, and I'm saying, check out LinkedIn. Being a Bryant student, there's such an advantage because our alumni network is not only so strong and close knit, but I mean, Bryant alumni are just doing amazing, crazy things. And so for our students to have people within their like alumni network who are out there doing the dream jobs that some of our students would like to one day get to, it's just such an advantage to utilize the network for sure. What advice do you have for students in general, whether it be, our marketing students or just students in overall career development? I think what you said about, sometimes I think our students can get discouraged. I know I sure did when I would think about wanting to get a job, like my dream job right off the bat, and that unfortunately doesn't happen all
Yeah.
of the time. But then that can lead to a lot of discouragement. And knowing that you can always work up to things is really great advice. So I appreciate that. But is there any other advice that you have just in general?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question. A couple things. One, I think even like these conversations too, I always like to try to caveat them by saying like, look, like people are going to mythologize their stories, and they're not even necessarily doing it maliciously. But, you know, when people kind of look back at their careers, I think oftentimes they forget all of the times that they failed, all of the times they went for jobs they didn't get, all of the times they were passed up for promotions, or all of the times they felt like I'm not going fast enough for me, when someone else looks at your career and you're like, wow, I can't believe you did that at whatever, you know, you were doing. So I think part of it is like, look, be real with yourself and realize that not everyone's being real with you when they talk. And again, I don't think it's malicious as much as I think people just, you know, we have a tendency in human behavior. We just kind of forget sometimes about the negatives once we feel like we're in a place we can talk about the positives. So like, that's the first thing I always say is like, don't let anyone mythologize their career story for you and then make you feel like, wow, I could never do that. The other thing I always, you know, like to say is you can do, and I know I said this already too, but you can do everything right and still it won't work out. This job market, as anyone that reads any news knows, is like, even though I know there's this story of like all of these opportunities, you know, honestly, it depends where you're looking. And there are a lot of fields where that's not true. Or there's a lot of fields where there are opportunities, but the job market is so competitive at the top, you know, you coming out of school might be competing with someone with 10 years experience, right? So it's not your fault that you're not getting the job. Don't necessarily look at that as using excuses. Like, you still have to work hard to try to get somewhere, but like, don't take constant rejection as some type of identifier that you're not worthy of something. Oftentimes, you know, it is a proverbial crapshoot sometimes when you're putting your resume into a pile where hundreds or thousands of people are doing the same, even with connections. So I always tell people it's more about quantity. Everyone who's ever been in a position of you know, relative success probably got lucky along the way, but they got lucky because they kept going for it, and their failure rate was probably, they were probably like 2 for 50, but like the 2 times it worked out in a big way. So yeah. I always tell people, like, you just got to keep going, and it can feel like you just never know when that wall will break through, but eventually it does.
Yes, it eventually does. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think just putting yourself out, continuing to have the courage to put yourself out there is really important. And to, you know, potentially go into some situations that are in a good way scary, whether that be, you know, going to a networking event in person, which is super, super intimidating, especially coming after this like very virtual time. But yeah, it's important to put yourself out there because you don't know when that wall is going to come down and when you're going to be able to break through and find that luck or that success. And, you know, you just have to be open and out there in order for those moments to happen. So thank you so much for that. I am going to let people comment and see if they have any questions. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to add them in the comments. And I will see if I missed any along the way. All right. Any questions? All right. So from Kylie, who is, for your knowledge, David, she is our marketing assistant over at the Amica Center. So she's one of our student workers. Are there any opportunities for current undergraduate students? I'm assuming at NBC Sports. So do you know of any like internship opportunities or people like what entry level jobs maybe people should be looking for?
Yeah, so internships out of school, I think, are fantastic, by the way. Again, it depends on the type of internship. You know, internships for some of these big companies, honestly, could be better than entry-level positions at others. So I always tell people, like, just because it says intern in the title and you're graduating, like, look at it, right? They could turn into something permanent, or even those 6 or 12 months could be more valuable than some entry-level job elsewhere. Being 6 months into NBC and having never actually met anyone physically, I don't have a ton of advice yet on opportunities for undergraduate students. And weirdly, I would actually say I am still more connected to the Disney side. And I would say for anyone that's interested and wants to connect with me later, I could probably help you more connecting you to folks still on the Disney side of the house, which I'm sure like if NBC heard on this would be like, wow, thanks. But I probably am just a little more apt to know that world still. On the NBC side, though, I'm still learning. I'm still understanding what like the internships or some of the coordinator level positions are. And so I will always keep my eye out. I guess the easiest way to answer it actually is just to say, I don't have anything specific I can say on this, but I can say I will always look. I always have students send me job links and say, do you know anything about this? And I will always do my best to get their resume to the right person who might have some influence in that hiring decision. So always contact me about it, even though I don't know exactly the lay of the land yet.
Cool. Thank you so much. And Kylie had said that she would love the Disney side as well. So I will be sure to put you guys in touch. And then Amy, who is one of our other career coaches, asked a really good question. Thank you, Amy. Could you tell us what skill sets NBC or Disney, like what are they looking for?
Yeah, great question. You know, this is probably for people that are in school right now and think about group projects, they probably have good and bad feelings about them. But I will tell you that you go into the real world and it is all about working with other people. It is all about collaborating. In a company as big as Disney or NBC, you can get nothing done without having folks that do not work directly with or for you. You need to be able to collaborate and have folks agree and build consensus and push things forward. And you have to have people that enjoy working with you, because you just can't get anything done in matrix style companies like this without that. So number one, be a good collaborator, be proactive in your communication style, right? Always have a good attitude. I mean, that goes a long way. These are like cliche pieces of advice, but they're true.
They're so
and the
true.
other part too, as I always tell people, is, you know, every role you're in some degree, you are a storyteller of some sort. So obviously when you're in marketing, you think about all the ways you are like literally telling stories to consumers in your marketing plans. But when I was in business development, I feel like I was doing marketing in its own way, and that I was constantly having to try to build persuasive arguments to senior leadership about which projects or which events or which sponsors to go after. And that it required a very similar skill set of being able to communicate, being able to build good stories, being able to validate your arguments with both kind of quantitative and qualitative data. And so all of those things are really interconnected almost in any discipline you'll find yourself in. You know, being a good collaborator, communicating well, telling good stories, simplifying your messages so that everybody can just quickly understand what you're trying to achieve, whether it's in a meeting or some multi-million-dollar marketing plan. I think that's true no matter which job you have.
Yeah. And that actually reminds me of a good point that I've been telling a lot of the marketing students that I've coached recently. And what you said about, you know, being able to kind of concisely get your message across and communicate. Resumes and cover letters when applying to marketing jobs is one of the best ways to, I think, to show the company what you can do, how effectively you can get a message across in the most, you know, effective, concise way. So I always tell people, I'm like, act as if your resume and your cover letter are your first marketing projects and market yourself the best way that you can. And then you're already showing that skill to them. So I'm happy you mentioned that, because I've been saying that to everybody. I always
tell people too, and again, some of this resume advice is very subjective. You know, it's like 100 people can look at your resume and have 100 different impressions. Right. But I always tell people, like, give your resume to the person that loves you most on this earth for feedback. And then when they give you the feedback, ask them very specific questions about it. And you will find that not even they will read every line of your resume, because no one actually does. Nope. Your resume is a marketing asset, and it should only be used to try to get someone interested to pick up the phone and call you in for an interview. Remember that when you're marketing yourself. Remember that the people that love you most on this earth will not read every line. So don't expect an employer to, like, or a potential employer to. Always make sure that you are in you know, marketing sense, like giving the best.
That is awesome. Thank you so much for that. That's some good resume advice. I've never thought about it that way, so I appreciate that. All right, so Eric asked us, any advice to new grads who are in their first job trying to find their footing in the real world?
Yeah, it's a lot that you'll learn quickly, I will say, no matter what job that you find yourself in. But if you are trying to find that first job or you just got into that first job, one thing I will say is, so this is like true of like data, right? Like when you are thinking about trying to come up with a hypothesis of something, like more data points always equals better, right? Like the bigger your sample size, the more diverse your sample size, the better chance you're going to actually hone in on the right hypothesis, argument, whatever. That's true for jobs too, right? So like if your first job in marketing, let's say it's absolutely terrible, your boss is terrible, your colleagues are terrible, that's one data point, right? So like don't necessarily let that impute everything you think about marketing for the rest of your life. That's true for certain companies that you might work for. A lot can influence your job, not even just the company, but who you work with on a day-to-day basis. So what I always tell to people is like, look, like if you're having a bad situation or you're in a bad environment, like, of course, you should try to get out of that, but don't necessarily let that taint you for the entire company that you work for. Don't necessarily let that taint you for the entire discipline, because that's one data point. So like, just give yourself a sense, be completely, don't be afraid to pivot and realize this isn't working for me and I want to do something completely different. Don't just stay in it for 20 years, but give yourself more than 6 months to say, you know what, this might be just one anomaly. Like maybe let me go try to find something else and maybe it will be a 180-degree difference.
Yeah, and that is true across, whatever major or industry that you go into. I was speaking to one of our psychology classes this morning, and they were, describing the settings of their internships, and I was like, I've worked in that setting, I've worked in that setting, I've worked in that setting, and I told them, I said, for the next decade of your life, most likely, it's really going to be more about recognizing and identifying the things that you don't want to do or don't like, and narrowing into into like your niche and what you do like and what's meant for you. And so, but it can get really discouraging as you're on that journey of seeing like, okay, I don't like that, I don't like that, I don't like that. Will I like anything? And it's like, yes, right. You will. You just have to go through the trial and error, but it's all very much worth it. And then Amy asked, has the pandemic changed the work environment for you? Are people going back into the office, or like how has the pandemic had an effect on you guys?
Yeah, so I have yet to meet anybody that I work with physically ever. So I'm still in Florida. NBC Sports is based in Stamford, Connecticut. Someday I will meet them in person, I'm sure, but I am not there yet. And, work from home or work remotely plans have changed again and again throughout the pandemic. They continue to kind of move back the date they expect most employees to come back into the office. There are some employees that are coming back now, but they're more doing it voluntarily. Maybe they live close to the office. Maybe they work better in an office environment. So what you'll see actually is that this is a lot of test and adjust. Tentatively, we're supposed to be back in the office early next year, probably on some type of hybrid basis, though that's still not confirmed. And you'll see that true for a lot of big companies now, where they're waiting. They're looking at Omicron and they're saying, I don't know exactly what our plan will be. And I think for you as an employee in that, what you have to realize is, okay, my work is now different. I work remotely. Some people thrive on that. Some people love the idea that they can kind of almost balance their home and work life in one environment. They don't have to commute. They can start work at 7 a.m. if they want. They can take breaks during the day, perhaps. But then there are other people that maybe either don't work that way, or they hate the Zoom fatigue, right? Or they hate the idea that they're never actually socializing with their coworkers. They're just talking to them through a screen. So I think a lot of that is going to also influence, like for undergrads that are coming out now, how important is that to you? Because there are going to be some companies that will market to you, you can always work from home. If that's important to you, you should go for that. But if it's not, or if you want to be in an office setting with other people, you want to look out for that too. So I think it's still TBD for a lot of these big companies, like what the future will look like.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that brings up a good point too, of when you are marketing yourself on your resume, or even just like in an interview and talking with an employer, I have a feeling that skills like adaptability and organization and self-management are going to be really good skills to talk about, especially during this time where they may not, those are extremely important skills for any time, but I think especially now because, if plans are changing potentially month to month, being able to have an employer know that you are adaptable, are ready to kind of roll with the punches that come with, the pandemic environment that we're kind of like living in right now. And then, you know, to know that you can stay organized and self-managed if you are remote, which I know a lot of people struggle with. It's just really important to kind of advertise that you are working on these skills and can do that, because you never know what's going to happen. I think we've learned that now.
We keep learning it again and again over the last 2 years.
I know. Yeah. It's been pretty wild.
Yeah.
I'm very fortunate to be back in the office.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
I'm one of those people. I was the person that was like, I need to socialize. I was like, I don't think I can last another day on Zoom. All right.
Yeah. Well, and I will say, sorry, one other thing I will say on that too is I do think, especially for people early on in their career too, like FaceTime matters, and it's easier, I think, sometimes to meet people that you don't just automatically come into contact with day to day in your business, in your work life. It's easier if you're in an office, hallway conversations or what have you, in a meeting. So I do think actually that younger or undergrads or people early in their career could be at a disadvantage in this environment. I also think it's a matter of like, well, how do I make this advantageous for me? Because that's always the case too. Like, how does this become a benefit? Maybe executives are more willing to have one-on-one conversations with me because they're not able to see me in like big town hall team meetings. So try to use it to your advantage, but to your point, it's definitely challenging for a lot of people.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of pros and cons to, being remote or being in person.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's something for, young professionals to kind of consider, and, even finding ways to make, if they are virtual, making that advantageous. So like, does being virtual allow 30 minutes in a work day to maybe, initiate a big team or group meeting during lunch hour, with your team, just to kind of like meet people that like otherwise you wouldn't normally talk to. Because as we emphasized, networking, making connections, cultivating those connections is so important. So if you are working from home, you don't want to lose out on some of the connections you might be able to strengthen in person. So trying to strengthen them over Zoom as best you can is really important.
Totally.
Any other questions from anyone who's viewing? Not seeing any. All right. Well, did you have any last comments, David?
For those that still want to hear me. No, I appreciate you having me on. And I always tell this to people. I mean, please feel free. They can work through the Amica Center, I'm sure, to get contact information from me. And I'm always happy to connect with with students who are looking for prospective opportunities, and whether it's the company that I work for or not, or they just want to pick my brain for advice. And I think that helps. I mean, try to build your network, try to connect with people. That's really the 50% of it. So always happy to help however I can, even if it's just a conversation.
Yeah, and we really, really appreciate that. And I just really appreciate you for taking the time, and for, the students that are on here watching this. I came into contact with David by reaching out to him through LinkedIn. I used our alumni search on LinkedIn. I found David, I reached out, and here we are chatting. So everything I say in my coaching sessions, I really do mean, and I use them myself, and they work. But I do appreciate you for taking the time again, but for also being my first live alumni. This is something that I hope to continue doing for our students, to, share information the way that you've shared in your information with us today and your advice. So I appreciate you for being my, first alumni to interact with us in this way. It's been really awesome. And if anyone, would like to connect with you further, they can absolutely reach out to me, come see us at the Amica Center, or shoot us an email. And I'm happy to put them in contact, and we can go from there.
Sounds great. Yeah, appreciate you having me. And thanks again.
Of course, we will be in touch. Thank you for everyone who watched. And it looks like we've got some suggestions on the line.
People lining up other opportunities for interviews. So there you go.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who watched. Hopefully we'll keep doing these.